Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Optical. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. Today, we're excited to be talking to Kelly O'Brien, an independent optometrist and co-owner of Bridge Eye Care. Kelly's journey in optometry has taken her from a corporate start at OPSM to building a thriving independent practice in rural South Australia. In today's conversation, Kelly opens up about the realities of business ownership, navigating partnerships, managing staff, and the unique challenges of running a practice outside the city, as well as sharing her experiences in co-owning a business with a friend, discussing the dynamics of blending friendship and business and how they've navigated challenges together, including the pressures of COVID. She also shares her experience as a woman in leadership, balancing career, family, and the expectations that come with both. We also touch on an often overlooked topic in the industry, mental health. Kelly reflects on the pressures of independent practice, the isolation that can come with it, and the importance of seeking support early. Her insights are both inspiring and practical, especially for optometrists looking to build a fulfilling and sustainable career. We have a great conversation touching on so many important points, so let's get into it. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Really excited about today's chat with you and the things that we're going to, go through, because it's really practical and really relative, especially to optometry practice owners, I feel. And sort of, as we'll come to learn in your experiences, there's what I believe will be a lot of sort of gold nuggets for people to be able to take home and absorb and hopefully learn from. But I guess before we get into all of that, can you start off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Well, I own an independent optometry business, I should say, about an hour out of Adelaide. I didn't start my career in independent optometry, though. I was a cadet, actually, with OPSM. I'm an Adelaide girl. And back in the day when I did optometry, there was no Adelaide University, so you couldn't do optometry in Adelaide. So big corporates offered cadetships to lure, students to come back to their hometowns and work. It was a way to get optometrists in those cities. Perth and Adelaide were the big ones. So my father actually worked for Lubman Pank, and he encouraged me to do optometry. He worked in human resources, but felt it was a good career path. I wanted to do law, actually. So I envisaged myself in courtrooms, but that's not exactly where I ended up. So, I took a cadetship with OPSM. I guess I wanted a differentiation from my father's work of business. I went to Queensland Uni and did optometry and found myself working for OPSM back in Adelaide 25 years ago.
And I guess for people in Adelaide, that would have been a pretty common story, obviously not with the uni not being there.
Yeah, it was. I think there's not many students that did it. I think there was one other in my year. But I think students didn't know about optometry because there was no uni. So that, you went to uni days in year 12 and it just wasn't really considered an option. So it probably wasn't as popular as what you'd think, considering now that, you can get paid while you study and have a guaranteed job. It's pretty unheard of now.
Yeah. What drew you to optometry in that case? Because obviously if it wasn't something that was so prevalent, you mentioned that law was, something that you were drawn to or thinking that you were going to do. What drew you to optometry, and I guess how has the journey evolved since graduating as well?
I guess what drew me was the ability to look after people. I guess law was super interesting at high school, and that's why I was drawn to that. But, my dad really, convinced me that it was a well-paid job. It was good conditions. You worked pretty much 9 to 5 and possibly some Saturdays. Back then, Sundays weren't a thing. And for a woman, I guess, who possibly had ambitions of having children, it was quite versatile in that you could work part-time quite easily and not, go back in your career. So, that was quite attractive as well. I didn't really realise the impact of moving out of home. I was literally had turned 17 a couple of weeks earlier when I moved to Queensland. It was a real challenge, but I think it grows resilience. And I would have come home a couple of times. My parents talked me into staying, but obviously I'm glad that I did. I don't know if you ever really know what you're getting yourself in for. You know, when you ask me to reflect back, I don't know that I really thought about what ambitions I would have in the profession. So I'm guess proud that it's brought me to where I am now in the business that I am.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think I was saying recently, if you knew what something was like after you started doing it, and would you have done it in the first place? And I feel like, I guess that's a question that maybe we can bring back towards the end to see if that's, I guess if you, would you do it all again if you had your time over? But yeah, it's one of those things you kind of go into a blind, but it opens up a lot of doors. You mentioned that you started off at OPSM, and they provided the vehicle, I guess, for you to study and then obviously to work. What was it like transitioning from OPSM and I guess maybe speaking to the corporate side of the industry in that regard, and then joining and eventually co-owning Bridge Eye Care? And I guess what motivated you to take those steps as well?
Yeah, well, 25 years ago, working for OPSM was a massive blessing, especially as a new grad. I had huge amounts of support. I had a mentor in an optometrist named Selwyn Peake, who was amazing to meet. And he really introduced me, I think, to what it meant to serve customers. He was a very, very good people person. So I was really grateful for that opportunity to have that support. They gave me our appointments. They really let me have an introduction into what it was to be an optometrist for quite a few years. I don't know that working in corporate optometry now is like that. It's hard to comment. I haven't been in that space for 15 years or so. But back then it was really, you could prescribe what you wanted. There were no KPIs. It really was very similar to how I practice today, I must say. So I was really grateful for that opportunity. I have to be honest, the reason that I went into independent optometry is I had the opportunity to work the same amount of hours and only work 4 days, or earn the same amount of money, I should say, and only work 4 days. So for me, it was a lifestyle opportunity. Murray Bridge is an hour away. I lived in Adelaide. So I reasoned that I had basically an extra day's worth of travelling. It was an hour there, an hour back. And I negotiated the pay. There was just no optometrists around. So, I guess I had the power to be able to negotiate a little bit. And so, yeah, that's how I did it. It was really just, wow, I get a day off a week. That's going to be awesome. I played a lot of sports, so that gave me the ability to do that as well. So, yeah, it was as simple as that, really. I'd like to think it was a little bit more complicated and overthought, but it really wasn't.
And I guess then, so you moved back home and over to Murray Bridge. You're working there as an optom. At some point, there was an opportunity to co-own the practice. I guess, was that a motivation that you had in coming back as well, or is that something that developed over time? And I guess then when that opportunity presented itself, was it something that you wanted to take up pretty quickly, and is it something that you were motivated to do?
Yeah, the opportunity came about just by circumstance. The people owned the business. One was an optometrist and one was a dispenser, and they both wanted to sell. And it just turned out that my colleague and I, Kristen, who we'll probably talk about a little more later, we both agreed that this was going to be a good step for us personally in the lives we had. I had 2 kids that were a little older, primary school type age, so I wasn't needing to be home with babies and toddlers anymore. And my husband had already started a greenfields business, so I knew that buying an already established practice was going to be a whole lot easier than that. We'd been through that process. So it was a no-brainer. Right. We didn't really have to talk about it, to be honest. Dave, my husband, and I, this is definitely what we want to do. And I knew what independent optometry could bring. Probably was still a little naive as to what owning a business really meant and the extra, I guess, responsibilities that brought. But once again, if you knew, maybe you wouldn't do it. So I think, in a way, a bit of naivety is good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess that really brings into the crux of what we want to talk about here, which is, that business ownership. And I guess, especially when there are partnerships involved with regards to some of the complexities that may occur and just the challenges that one has when owning an optical practice. And we'll come to speak about that as well in relation to being a rural practice as well, because that in itself, I guess, presents a whole set of challenges as well. So obviously, owning the practice now, it comes with its own set of challenges. how has your experience been navigating the business side of optometry?
Yeah, it's the most challenging. The clinical stuff, I guess once you get older, you become competent at it and you're confident in your abilities. And so, yeah, it's the outside the room stuff that is really challenging. But for me, optometry, it can be quite mundane. If you come out of university and you have these great ideas, and the reality is you're in a room doing a lot of repetitive work. So I guess the practice ownership for me came at a really good time for a new challenge. I think managing staff, and any small business owner, it's not unique to optometry. Managing staff would be the thing that is the most challenging. You've got personalities, and dispensing is difficult. It's not just a retail job, and giving respect to the skill that's involved in a certain level of intelligence. I soon discovered that you can't just hire retail staff. I think it would take us at least a year to train someone fully in dispensing, which is challenging because you're trying to run a practice and also train someone, which means extra hours on the floor, having someone that's able to do that training. And being in a rural community means that you're staffing, the numbers of people that are applying for jobs are really limited, and employing people who live in that community is really beneficial, but the pool is smaller, obviously. So that's definitely a challenge. The partnership stuff we'll talk about a bit later has been really challenging as well. COVID provide a massive challenge for every business, but it also challenges partnerships because you really find your true personality and how you deal with crises. And that really stretches you.
And we'll definitely touch on that. I want to sort of come back to that staffing component, because I feel like pretty much almost every practice in Australia feels the same way in that instance with regards to staffing. I know across the businesses that I have, it's obviously one of the most challenging sides as well. So I feel like it's quite a common challenge that we all share. That's obviously for you, I guess, magnified by the fact that you are in a rural setting, and that makes it, I guess, slightly more challenging. For me, when I think of staff in our industry and what makes it challenging, especially if there's a retail side of it, it's the fact that we're sort of blending, a clinical role with technicality with a retail fashion component. And I feel like that's, from my point of view, why it might be challenging to find the right person that can blend both of those and the particular skill sets that are required. Like you mentioned, you can't just hire retail staff. I mean, you can, but there's a way. So I guess from your experience, how have you tackled that challenge? And when it comes to identifying staff or going through that process, what is the sort of things that you're looking for that have enabled you to overcome some of the challenges?
Yeah, we've made some mistakes over the years, there's no doubt, and that's probably the best way you learn. And when I say mistakes, I mean just hiring people for reasons that I think, experience for one. We've learnt personality needs to conquer all. If you can deal with people, we pretty much back ourselves to be able to teach. And there's so many resources out there these days that we're really lucky to have the support. We're a provision practice, so we've got the support of a business coach, and they've got resources, and even, Optical, like lens companies, are able to provide huge amounts of training. So that patient interaction, particularly the way that Kristen and I have decided to run our business, and which reflects our personalities, it's all about the people. If you can't interact with people, if there's no service there, then we're going to run into some problems. So we basically only hire on personality now and how we think they'll mix with the team. That's the other really challenging thing. We're in a small business, and if you have personality clashes, that becomes really difficult. And it's a minefield in terms of human resources, and something that we're not very well equipped to deal with as optometrists. We really need to lean on outside help in those situations with mediation. And because we're not on the floor, I think that's the other big issue we have as owner optometrists is that we're not out there. We rely on a practice manager to be able to manage these situations. It's her word against her word, and you're embroiled in these sort of personality clashes or incidents that you actually haven't witnessed. So that over the years I've found really challenging. You can maybe hear a few things from the room, but overall you're testing eyes. So you're not able to give that immediate feedback or do that training on the spot when you see things. You're dealing at post-event, which is really, really difficult. But personality's key. That's really,
Yeah, totally. And I guess you can teach the skills. So it's sort of like a little bit of a, look for attitude and personality and then train the skills, I guess, that are required. Because I think one thing that I sort of heard when you were speaking there was the common element, regardless of the clinical or the retail side, is the fact that it's a people orientated industry. And you've got to be good with people. And so if they've got that mindset or that ability to be good with people, then you can teach them, I guess, that the rest of it with the resources. I think, having a business coach or an outside voice, I think is definitely very powerful and very empowering to the practice. So I think things like that, where you can leverage other people's knowledge that have seen, I guess, the other side of the picture too, potentially can help as well. You've mentioned management, your practice. There are two partners, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that are running the operations there. And I imagine that can be tricky, especially, when it comes to managing partnerships. There are personal relationships that potentially evolve and develop. How have you handled that, I guess, balance between friendship and business when you're managing a practice together? And you've mentioned COVID during that sort of period as well, and if that brought anything up in particular.
Yeah, it's been a really rewarding and at times almost crippling, I guess, challenge for Kristen and myself. We were friends first, when we became colleagues, and then we became business partners. So I think that probably adds a slight bit of complication, but it also means we know each other really, really well. And what we've come to realize is it's like any relationship. The times that we've really struggled is the times that we haven't prioritized each other and our relationship. It's like, husbands or, friends, if you don't put energy and effort into something, it is going to start dying. And my relationship with Kristen, or our relationship, is probably the second most important in my life, second to our partners. So the realization about that and the effort that's required to communicate and make an effort and know each other, even when times are tough or when we've got other things happening in our lives that may not be the priority, is really important. And we've really leaned on other people. Our business coach, as you said, we've admitted that at times we've struggled, and understanding our personalities and how we make decisions, what triggers we have. COVID was a really highlight. I'm a sort of big picture. Let's make a decision quickly. I'm really quite sure in my thoughts, and Kristen likes to take her time. She likes to research. So you can imagine in COVID that presented quite a challenge, in that I was like, we do this, we split into teams, we do this, and Kristen it was a lot. So she was like, hang on, like I need to talk to people, I need to think about this. But that's a blessing because she thinks about things that I don't. And I'm a decision maker. So whereas she might take a little more time, that sometimes quick decisions do need to be made, and I'm really confident in that space. So we've come to understand that our differences are actually our strengths. And if we can understand them and understand in what situations we thrive and we can lean on each other, then we suddenly go to being really, really strong. But that's been a process. We haven't just come to that as 30-year-olds and gone, oh, your strength's this and my strength's that, and we're going to have this amazing business. It's taken some humility and some understanding of weaknesses and being able to be insightful to yourself and know how you do tend to react and leaning on each other in those situations. So it's been a journey. I'm really proud of us though. Like I think I couldn't do it without her, and being in a rural community, and you and I have discussed it, Michael, that it can be very isolating working on your own. So I'm so grateful to have her, but it's not something that just organically happens, a business partnership. It requires attention and effort, and you have to give and take.
Yeah. And we'll definitely touch on the challenges of rural optometry in a few minutes. And thank you for what you've just mentioned there, because, I believe that although it was probably quickly described, that actual journey was epic and emotional and challenging. And I think, like you said, you've identified that you're different, and I'm not sure at which point that was discovered, whether it was early on or not. But then once you understand that, I guess making that work is the process that you sort of alluded to, and the complexity of, and a lot of business partnerships will break in that particular process for one of a million reasons. But it seems like in your scenario, you've been able to look beyond that shortfall initially and then say, how can we become better because of this? And maybe not thinking that at the time, but the process has allowed you, and that continual consistency of working on it has enabled you then to be on the other side and have gone through the experience, probably be stronger for it, and your business be way better for it too. So again, I know that that's really complicated and it's probably taken time. When you look back on that, what are some of the key, and especially say for people that are in partnerships that are maybe challenging at this particular instance or whatever it may be, what were some of the things that you look back on now in reflection and sort of say, well, I learned this from that and this is how I'd approach it maybe next time, or this is the advice I could give to somebody when it comes to sort of those situations that you found yourself in?
Don't leave things too long. I think sometimes relationships, we all know, we can feel when things are drifting or that you're disconnecting, and if you leave it too long, it can be broken. I think there's too much hurt and too much disconnect to be able to rebuild. So my big advice, and it takes guts, like it really takes some courage and some humility, because you've got a part to play as well. It's not just the other person, you get equal measures in this. And so for you to admit that, I need to change or I need to prioritize you over some things that, are important to me, I think is the key. Be really honest with yourself, and it's worth fighting for. If you can find a partner that you can work with and, as you say, look, reflect on this journey, and we've built something together, and no one will ever take that away from us, despite our big changes in our personal lives that we had to navigate. So, my big key advice would be honest, check in with yourself. There's some work to do, not just in a partnership, but on yourself, because we always can be better and there's always things to learn. So if you're happy to look inside first, then you can start, that process with someone else.
Yeah, love that. Awesome. So if we sort of change tune slightly here, something we spoke about before was staff and recruitment, but I want to look at it from a little bit of a different perspective. In the context of leadership is obviously something that I'm very interested in that regard. And obviously when I speak to different businesses across the spectrum in Australia with regards to the optical profession, I'm always curious to find, how individuals that are in positions of leadership, approach leadership, and in particular with reference to management and say staff management. So how do you approach that and staff management in context with your leadership?
Oh, it's a constant state of learning. I've made so many mistakes over the years, and that's probably where the biggest learning comes from. I try and lean on people around me to bounce, because I'm a pretty sort of black and white, like, I think we should do this and this is wrong or this is right. And it hasn't served me well in lots of those leadership type spaces, because I'm a strong person. And if you go in there and, I guess put your foot down, especially these days, it really just doesn't have the effect of what you're trying to achieve, I think. So I've tried to learn to bring people in and be more open in terms of there's always reasons, not jumping and judging to conclusions, having open conversations. When you start having regular catch-ups with staff, I'm also the president of a basketball club and we have a lot of members. And so that's been really challenging leadership-wise as well, and having to embrace people from different walks of life. But it's really helped me in optometry to have that experience in an outside business as well, not just optometry. And it really is connecting with people, hearing them, understanding. They may not necessarily like the decision that you make ultimately, but if they feel heard, that goes a long way to them then buying into whatever decision, and if they understand the reasons. But I guess I try and look at other people that I think are doing a good job. I try and be really aware of my own personality and how I have a tendency to approach things, which isn't necessarily always going to get the best outcome. So that's how I approach it. But I feel like leadership is, I'll never master it. It's the most difficult thing I think you'll ever do. I try and lead by example too. I try and really, my word is really important, and how my integrity. So they're really the two things that I try and really honour. And if I can go to sleep at night and know that I've done what I said I was going to do and that I've done it with some integrity, they're really the couple of things I try and hold myself to daily.
Yeah.
It's a tough gig.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, it's a continual evolution and a development. It's not something that stops. in hearing what you're saying there, that there's a self-awareness component there. Obviously, that seems to be very prevalent in your mind with regards to what you're doing. And I think that probably helps as well in that context of, trying to get the best out of yourself and your staff with regards to your operations in the business. Have you found any unique challenges, especially as a woman in a leadership position?
Oh, yes. It's something I grapple with a lot. I think there's a couple of components to this. One is that, you're balancing a lot of plates in the air being a woman, and I have an amazing husband, and he does all the cooking, he's very supportive. I don't think I'd be able to own a business without having sort of an equal partnership at home. But I think you still carry the mental load of the household. The kids will always ring me if there's a problem. I buy the birthday presents for, parties, and there's always those extra things. And every mother will tell you they love it, but it is that constant juggle of the demands of a household, and sometimes aging parents, you've got a lot of other family things going on that I think. So that's the challenge, and being out of the workforce for a certain time to actually have a family, I found challenging. Coming back in, you haven't worked for a year. Clinically, you're a little bit unsure, and maybe you've had more time off. I mean, I only had a year and I only went back one day a week. So you sort of lose touch a little bit and lose a bit of confidence, I think, in your ability to do the job, and you're constantly having to go to childcare pickups, and there's sort of these conflicting time management components. And now my children are older, I found that really freeing, that I'm able to stay at work as long as I need to. I'm able to finish off things. But the other thing with a woman is that you like to be liked. I think it's a fair comment that most women really struggle with the hard decisions and how they're judged by their staff. I think women are still judged more harshly, and if you are hard, then you're a bitch. Like that's really, excuse the terminology, but my experience is that and I watch my husband in a management role, and I think they're certainly given a lot more leeway in that space. The HR stuff's not as intense. We're really conscientious and about the way we interact with staff. And so I do think that there's still challenges associated with how you come across, how you manage those relationships with staff being a woman, and the expectations that just by being female come with both yourself. You're not going to be liked by everyone, and women generally don't like that. So the sooner you sort of come to that conclusion, the better off you'll be personally with having to make some of those tough business decisions.
And how have you handled it? You're obviously very mindful of these components and these aspects. So how do you navigate that to make sure that you're doing what you need to do, but also not being perceived as somebody you don't want to be perceived as, I guess, if that's a good way to describe it?
I'm really conscious about drawing the line with being friends with staff. We are friendly. I'm not friends with any of them on social media. I think there does need to be a line, and I try not to take things personally. Kristen and I and our staff really have a joke that I'm the bad cop. Kristen's much softer than me, and which is fine, but that's upsetting occasionally that I guess I'm seen like that, but it's not a personal thing. And if the business needs to function like that, and there does need to be someone who makes these tough decisions, I want those decisions to be made in our business. And if that has to be me, then so be it. So that's how I've tried not to take things personally. Like I have sort of someone that I go and talk to once a quarter, and so we debrief some of that stuff. So I've got someone outside that I can talk to and explore, and why am I getting upset about not being liked? What does that actually mean? It's not about me personally. It's not a personal thing. So, I've just really worked on, not taking things personally, and understanding what's good for the business is going to be the best decision long term. But it's not easy.
No, I can imagine. And that's a perfect example of how, say, the partnership works, identifying, different strengths and qualities of the individual owners, and then being able to work towards that as a team. So that you're addressing all of those instances, making the hard decisions, but having, someone there that's a little bit, softer, and then perhaps a little bit more, so I can see how that could work quite well once you understand that dynamic. And it seems like that's something that you've done, and then sort of, for the benefit of the team. But I understand sort of, one of the most challenging things in business is that blurring of the lines. It's like you work so often with these people and you spend so many hours with them on a daily, weekly basis. And you invariably become friends, obviously, because if you weren't friends at the core of it, you probably, wouldn't be together. But then there's also that business component, and in a small business, it's the biggest challenges. And how do you manage that, I guess, as well? So I think, setting up boundaries and lines, I think, are critical. And so, like you mentioned, it's not easy, but it's critical for any successful business that's done. Looking back at the growth of Bridge Eye Care, what strategies have you found most effective in building a loyal patient base? I've seen your practice and how it runs, and it's definitely a true testament to you and the team as to the store and the patients and everything you got going there. It's really fantastic. So I guess, having seen that, what strategies have you found most effective?
Being me. So I think, and Kristen, obviously our personalities are our biggest strengths, and we will eventually, and we have started to bring someone else in, but basing the business, I guess, on that integrity thing that we spoke about, understanding we do practice in a small town, and word spreads. You really have to make sure that you're looking after that reputation in the way you deal with people and the way you acknowledge mistakes. How you deal with the unhappy client is probably the most important thing you do in a small town, so that they stay happy-ish. You can salvage a situation so they don't go and tell 20 people down the bowls club that you're the worst optometrist in town. So where we are, it's really about the personal relationships. And Specsavers came to town a number of years ago now, which was another massive challenge to our business. And at the time, it was heart-wrenching. It was very, very, I was scared. We had this disruptor come in that was completely out of our control. But it really made us think about what we're about. We can't be all things to all people, which we were trying to be in that space. And when Specsavers came in, it's like, well, what are we about? What is our point of difference? So we basically went for that personal experience. We know we do longer appointments. The quality of the product we sell is excellent, and we make sure of that. We want to give people the best. We certainly charge prices for it. We made sure that we charge for our time, so that there's a value on us as optometrists, which is a point of difference. And if people don't want to pay for it, we're perfectly comfortable with that. And it's almost a relief to have somewhere else in town that people can go, that if they really can't afford it, or they don't want to afford it, there is another option. Before there wasn't. And so we sort of felt, I guess, some social pressure to be able to provide an option for those people. So, I think it's about what you're offering and the people. We really decided that we're going to offer quality product, and the interaction that you have with us is going to be excellent every time, and you're going to see the same people. So we can build those relationships, which is important. And we make good notes, Michael. Like, it's really simple, but how's Jenny, your daughter, going? And people almost fall off their chair. They're like, how can you remember that? Of course they have to own up and say, well, actually I wrote it down. But that goes a long way, especially more and more these days. People are just not getting that sort of service anywhere, or that sort of interaction anywhere. So they really appreciate it.
Yeah. I think that personalized service, and the more personalized you make it, obviously, when you're trying to build that relationship, is critical. And I love the fact that, you mentioned that, when Specsavers came in and it was a disruptor and you were worried, and so you've done like a 360, and it's like, well, I'm actually glad they're there now, because I can now, I can be more me, and that enables me to be more me. I don't have to cater to that particular market, which exists. And, and that's the beauty of, of our business, that, not everyone's for us. And so the fact that you've been able to find that tune in that regard is, I think, really empowering. And you've now flipped that on its head. It's like, not that you're thankful that they're there, but, you appreciate the fact as to what they serve in the community in context of what you do. And that's only because you know exactly what you're about. And that's, I think, a key observation there. So if we change tune slightly and we focus on this rural aspect of optometry, obviously in the context of your working career, it seems like you've spent the majority in a rural setting. You've got obviously some experience in the city as well, but when it comes to the rural side of things, can you share some of the unique challenges that comes about being an optometry practice owner in a rural setting?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we've previously had, and the future will possibly look a little different, is just getting optometrists. We just couldn't. We've tried on a number of times to have someone join us, and we really have just not one applicant to come out, and it's an hour out of Adelaide. We're not talking in the middle of nowhere. There's allied health services. There's a population. You can commute from Adelaide. I mean, I do that. So no one would travel. It was as simple as that. Even for, I guess, inflated salary, they just wouldn't do it. So that's been the biggest challenge so far. And as I said, with the number of optometry students coming out, which is a whole nother discussion, we have now managed. And the last time we advertised, which was almost a year ago now, we had quite a number of applicants. So that's been a massive shift in quite a short space of time. I think the isolation clinically and business-wise, clinically I've done some work in Port Lincoln as well. My parents used to live over there for a wonderful independent practice, and that clinical decision-making when you don't have ophthalmology support on hand is really massive. I think I worked there over 10 years ago now, and I think I would be much better equipped now after, I guess, doing such a long stint in Murray Bridge, that I would probably be better equipped now to make some of those decisions. But are you talking, do you need to get the helicopter over? Or do you need to tell them you need to drive 6 hours to Adelaide? And that decision is really on you. I think now with IT and with the amount of equipment we have, that would be easier, because you can now just email photographs and email the clinical picture to someone at the RA. So I think probably 10 years ago, we didn't have that. We didn't have the equipment, and we really didn't have those relationships to be able to get a clinical decision from high above as to what you should do. So I think possibly that might be easier now, but it's still there. Just still the buck stops with you. In the city, you've got an ophthalmologist that will see them that day. So even if you're not sure, you've got a backup plan. I think the business side of things, unfortunately, we've lost a good friend over the years with just some of the pressures of working on your own and constantly having to make those decisions for yourself and not having someone to bounce ideas off, and day in, day out having to look after staff. That burden really builds. And I think it takes a very strong person or someone with a lot of good surrounding support to be able to work through that on your own. Dave and I have both got business partners, and as we've gotten older, we're so grateful for having those people to be able to bounce ideas off. So I think it's a real thing, having that pressure of responsibility, that it certainly was an issue for our friend, and I know that he felt it acutely. So I think rural optometry is so rewarding. The patients being able to, the pathology clinically, it's really rewarding. But having a good support network, I think, is vital to being able to survive, especially as an independent, a sole practitioner. It's a really tough gig, and you need to make sure that you're able to have support in that space.
And you've spoken about a colleague there that sort of came across hard times, and you've mentioned to me, and by all means, if it's not something that you want to expand on, feel free not to. But, I guess that the challenges and the burden sort of, from what I understand, came on really quickly, and it was probably not something that you perhaps foresaw, or it wasn't maybe in your mind as a possibility with regards to what occurred and I guess the instances of that. But that support is super critical. So what advice would you have for anyone that sort of feels like, maybe the pressure is mounting, in a rural setting, understanding that people, will feel it at certain times, and they feel maybe like there is no one. Is there, I guess, any words of advice, having been through what you've been through and understanding it from your perspective, that you would sort of impart with people that you may think could be in that situation?
Yeah, I think identifying it early, like I said before, with the partnership stuff, and I guess identifying that it can really, or being aware that it can spiral quickly. Our colleague did have a few chats with us around those pressures, and I think in hindsight, I didn't probably take them seriously enough or understand that it was building to such a level that he would action anything. So, and now I've had that experience. If I had a colleague say to me that, that they're going through a similar thing, then I would encourage them to get help a lot earlier. And I guess I just didn't have the awareness that things could happen so quickly, and that the mental health can deteriorate so quickly. So that I think early intervention is the key, and just understanding there's so much support out there, even from, people like myself. If I knew a colleague wanted to have a chat about some of the challenges, just having talked to someone sometimes makes you feel less alone, in that everyone's facing very similar challenges. Independent practitioners can reach out to Provision, and I'm sure even like yourself, Michael, if an optometrist reached out to you guys, there's certainly a lot of support. It's just taking that brave first step of going, you know what, this is really hard and I need someone to chat to.
Yeah, that seems to be the hardest part of it, right? Because I think the industry is, although quite varied, it is one industry. And so we understand the challenges. And so if someone does reach out and, does open up with something that's, that is serious, all of us would be ears and would provide the time in that scenario. So I think, the message would be, if people do feel like that, reach out. There are people within the industry that understand your challenges. I always feel like people think like they're going through things themselves, but more often than not, when you open up, you find that there's a lot of more people that are experiencing those challenges. And if you can not necessarily group them, but if you can understand that it's all part of what we go through, and there will be someone there that can provide advice, hopefully, to get you through that. And that can only come out, like you said, by taking that first brave step. So, and from us identifying it and sort of realizing it, and then, being there to support them, I guess. So, yeah, it's a pretty important message, that one. It's probably one that is not spoken about enough in our industry with regards to, the mental health side of things, and really, promoting that, especially being a practice owner.
Definitely.
There is a massive rewarding component to being in the rural optometry sector too, and this is changing the tune a bit again. So can you speak to me about some of the most rewarding experiences that you've had coming out of a rural environment? Because it is a little bit unique, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, it's the rewarding stuff is the people, the being included in people's lives. I think clinically there's a couple of times that really stand out. I had a little boy, he hadn't started school yet, and he's just got his driver's license. So this is what we're talking sort of, over 10 years ago, but he will stay with me forever, in that we were sort of dabbling in taking kids' retinal photographs back then. We weren't really doing everyone. I don't even know why my team took his pictures, but he had these whopping macular scarring, like these huge scars. He's less than 5. So, and I almost stopped breathing. I was like, what the hell is this? And it turns out he had this really rare macular dystrophy. It's called North Carolina macular dystrophy. And there's only about 50 families in the world with this. And the family had no idea. Turned out his father had it as well. And so then the challenges of him going to school, he hasn't got really low vision, but he's got low enough vision that it was a challenge. They had to put up reflective poles at school so he didn't, when he's running around the playground, he didn't bash into the poles and hurt himself. He obviously had support in the classroom. And so watching him now, get a license, and we obviously take retinal photographs on every possible person now after that. But I think when you play a small part in their life, it's really the memorable ones. I had a lady just a few weeks ago who unfortunately is in her 50s and didn't know she had RP. She has about 5 degrees of vision. She's had eye tests for I don't know how many years, and it was never diagnosed. And it's heartbreaking because her business is gone, obviously her license, and her whole life is now turned upside down. She needs to go on travel. She's got very little vision. And so it's the people like that. My very first enucleation was back in OPSM days, and this woman just came for an eye test, and she had a massive tumour in her eye, and she had it enucleated. I went and saw her in hospital. I was so, I guess, affected by that. She ended up passing away from the cancer, but, she sent me flowers. And so it's when you feel like you've had this really small impact on their life, or maybe it's a big impact and sometimes it's not a good one, but to be able to maybe hold their hand through something that is literally life-changing is really a privilege. And people just appreciate it so much. Yeah, I think as you get older, those little moments that you have with people through sometimes some really dark times, and for them to, I guess, empower you with that or trust you with that it's really powerful.
And I know you've taken some extraordinary steps with some of your patients. A story that you've shared with me, and I'd like to sort of go through it again, was when you drove a patient to the hospital yourself. I guess what drives you to go above and beyond in providing patient care? And can you speak to that particular story and explain the circumstances as to what got you doing that?
Yeah, I've done it 3 times now. So there's been 2 this year, I think, because I just developed, one of them I already had a relationship with, and he urgently needed to go back to Flinders. to have an eye looked at that he'd had operated on, and he doesn't. His wife's passed away. He's 90, and so there was no other choice. He's not going to get there any other way. And of course, I'm going back to Adelaide. I do commute, so it's a no-brainer for me. And so I organised to meet his daughter at a pub on the eastern side of Adelaide, and we basically did the patient handover there. And yeah, so and the other one, it was quite funny because we have a new optometrist working with us, and he's been out of university a few years, and his experience was in a different setting for the first couple of years, and he had a patient with a significant retinal detachment. And this man was just a working class, really, I guess, ochre sort of bloke. And Andrew, the optometrist, was going to call an ambulance. He couldn't drive to Adelaide. He obviously had a macular off retinal detachment. And I said, well, if he just waits, of course I'll drive him to the Royal Adelaide Hospital. He can't wait for an ambulance. It may never come. And Andrew looked at me in this really shocked way. And it's like, you're going to do what? And, to me, it just makes complete sense. And so I bundled him in the car, and he's actually a really funny story. Well, it's sort of sad, but I dropped him off at the Royal Adelaide, and they knew he was coming. And it was a Friday afternoon. I dropped him off at about 4:30, and, we actually went to his house first and got some clothes and things. And then we drove down, and they didn't operate that night, but he had no way of getting back to Murray Bridge. So he actually slept on the street that night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they wouldn't operate on him. And he ended up catching a bus or something back. He rang me at about 9 o'clock that night and said, Kelly, they're not going to operate. I'm just going to have to go to a few pubs and then just find somewhere to, and he slept in the Parklands, I think, which made me so angry that happened. I just, the system really failed him. He didn't get the surgery until that next Thursday. They really messed him around. Yeah. So, but, he was hilarious. He rang me and said, I'll find somewhere to sleep. And, he actually wasn't that bothered. I guess he's pretty resilient. But I think it's just the human connection. If you can help someone else, why wouldn't you? So it makes me feel really good, Michael. I get a kick out of it. Yeah, it's really, I find it really rewarding, actually. I do it just as much for me as I do for them.
Yeah, and I feel like being in a rural practice, and again, the community sense must be very strong there, and the community togetherness must be stronger than in the city, I would imagine, purely because you're growing up with these people, and you're seeing things, and they're not, people will obviously move on, but you've just got that ability to grow and to learn. Like you mentioned, that patient came in at 5, and now it's getting their driver's license, so you get to really see that. And I'm sure the family, and everyone else in the context around that person. And I feel like that's probably a strength of independent optometry too. I feel like that's definitely a strength that we have, or that independents have, is that ability to really focus on the individual and the person. The extremities of taking people to the hospital and going to their place beforehand and getting clothes. I mean, that's obviously testament to yourself and the way that, that you care for your patients in that regard, and making sure that they're being looked after. And that's amazing. But I guess, that rural sort of environment does encourage that.
Oh, it does. And if any new grad talked to me, I'd say, run, don't walk, go and at least get an experience rurally. And our new optometrist, in his interview with us, he said, I love pathology. And Kristen and I sort of, glanced at each other. And in the first 2 weeks, he literally came out of his room every day and was like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. The clinical experience in those settings, because unfortunately it is a bit lower socioeconomic. People leave things a bit longer. They don't get the help. They might not be able to afford to for whatever reason, or they just don't have the medical intelligence to know, I need to get help for this. So you do end up seeing some really interesting things. But I can't spruik it highly enough to go and have that experience. I think it's as close as you can find to what you wish for in university, of what you think optometry is going to be like when you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at uni and think this is what I'm going to do. The way that you can choose to practice, the time you can spend with patients, the care you can take is the closest, I think, to what you think that the career is going to be like. And there's no pressure. Chris, we have to make a living, obviously. There's no doubt there's business pressures, but Kristen and I can always do what's best for the patient. And there's no KPIs. We take retinal photographs and Optos on everyone. We do OCTs on everyone, and that's purely our decision to do that. It's not because we have to or because we have to sell it to someone. We want that information and everyone gets it.
Well, and that in turn, I think, only benefits your patient and benefits your business because you're learning more about them and you can better treat them and provide that better service. And it's just, it just all loops into that, I guess, that equation of success to some extent. And I feel like you're experiencing that. So, yeah. What's kept you motivated during the tougher times? Obviously, we've touched on a few and, whether it's managing the staff shortages or navigating through the pandemic and all the other challenges that have been thrown in, family challenges as well that you've got to manage while running a business. I guess over the last, 20 odd years or so, what is it that's really kept you going and what motivates you then and what motivates you now?
I think I have a slight fear of failure. So I think the drive to succeed, I just won't let myself fail. It's just really not an option, I guess. So that keeps the cogs turning. I think having Dave as an optometrist as well helps keep the interest to a certain point. Clinically, he's excellent and I can bounce ideas off him and, I can send him a retinal image and say, what do you think of that? So I think that's helped the clinical picture and helped me be able to keep developing as a clinician and having someone else who is still pushing the bar in that space. So making me, want to be better clinically but also understanding my boundaries, understanding what space I'm happy to work in and what my skills are, I think is reassuring and it gives you confidence to know, no, this is outside me or this is in my wheelhouse. The challenges of the business, I think when you keep setting, as we've just moved into a new practice and we've moved out of a shopping centre into the main street in Murray Bridge and that was really scary, really, really scary. The pushing the boundaries really makes you think, okay, are we good enough? If we move locations, are people going to follow us? It challenges your sense of security. And that's it, in a way, makes you just need to have faith in what you're doing. So I think what motivates me to answer your question is a faith in what I'm trying to build and the way I go about things. I've got an internal belief that I'm a good optometrist. I have a good practice. I have a good rapport with my patients. And so then it becomes a loyalty as well that, I'm going to be here for them. I've told them I'll be here and when they need me, I will be here. So it's been dependable in that environment. And I still enjoy it. I think I found a good balance. I don't know if I could work in optometry 5 days a week. It's pretty, the way that we practice is pretty intense in that you're having a lot of conversations and people tend to tell you a lot of things. So that can be draining at the end of the day. I work 7 days a fortnight clinically and that's probably a good space for me, I think, just in trying to maintain my own mental health and energy levels.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be, I guess, to bring it back to the beginning, that seems to be why you started in Murray Bridge in the first place. You mentioned that, you were going to be able to work a little bit less. So you had that lifestyle component already sort of, ingrained from that point of view. And I think that's the beauty of the industry. And again, that's something that you mentioned about when you chose optometry, you have that flexibility potentially to manage your lifestyle. And I think over and above everything that we've discussed today, your lifestyle and, your own, mental state and what's important to you is critical. And you've been able to manage that pretty successfully in that regard. So yeah, all power to you in that regard. You mentioned David. So David's your husband. And so he's an optometrist in Adelaide as well. So can you speak more? You did touch on it, but I guess if we highlight that as a point and discuss what that's like having a partner that's also in the industry. So it's, it's, I guess, optics and optometry all day long.
Yes, it is. And we met at university, so very incestuous. I think there's how lots of us meet our partners is in that university environment. And him and I worked together very early on in his greenfields. I used to do Saturdays with him, but we've figured out pretty early on that we work very differently and we're very different people, as Michael, you will attest. He's an optics nerd. He's a full nerd.
Yep.
But he's a lot smarter than me, and he clinically is excellent, and he has a contact lens practice, and which he's put a lot of time into building his skills, and he has quite a niche market. So Look, it's great. We don't talk about optometry. We don't talk about business stuff together because we run our businesses extremely differently. And we've soon worked out that that could be a point of contention between us, that he's completely frustrating and so am I in his mind. So we stay away from sort of the business side of it, but we do compare notes with patients. And I find him an excellent resource that just to bounce ideas. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? He understands. He's been really supportive, obviously, of my business. And look, if I ever ask for his opinion, he certainly gives it. And look, I think when we're talking about that partnership stuff with Kristen, Dave sometimes is a deal breaker. He owns half of Bridge Eye Care, although he doesn't, have a day-to-day operating. But if we're not sure about something, and because Kristen's got a very long-standing relationship with Dave as well, we turn to him and say, hey, what do you think? And we both value his opinion. So he has served that purpose too. I'm really grateful for him, in his support of me as a businesswoman, but also as an optometrist, and to be able to have that clinical support has been invaluable. I don't know what I'd do without him. So yeah, we've found a good balance, I think, in some work, but probably not as much. I mean, when we first graduated, you could imagine the whole night was spent talking, I saw this and I saw this, but yeah. Now it's, did you go to the shops or did I go to the shops? Isn't right. Certainly, unless something's really interesting, it doesn't make it to home.
It doesn't get mentioned.
Nah.
But I guess that support mechanism is crucial. And having witnessed it firsthand, obviously you guys, are both running awesome businesses, and there's an understanding, I think, and that's really important in terms of how that develops and how it's evolved. And from the perspective I've seen it from, it's kicking goals in all directions. So it's really awesome to see. For younger optometrists or students who might be listening, what advice would you give them about pursuing a career in independent optometry, especially in rural areas? I know we've already sort of touched on it, but I guess sort of as we start to draw to the end of the chat here, what would you have to say to those students, of which there are many coming out of now, as you've alluded to as well? And I think that's going to create another complexity in its own right. It's probably another conversation for another day, but what would you say to them?
Be brave. Take a risk and really look at what you can get out of it, because I think, as a young person, you look at what you're going to sacrifice or what you're going to give up. You're not going to be in the city. You might be separating from family, but for your career, it will be invaluable, and you'll develop relationships and develop skills that you will take a lot longer. You may still develop them in a city location, but you will seriously fast track your skills both in and out of the consulting room, and you will find it so rewarding. I think lots of new grads coming out now, they're super intelligent kids. They have to be, because they got into optometry, the ATAR's super high. Yeah. And so to stay engaged in the industry, the job itself can be really, really boring. I looked for a way out when I first graduated. I was looking through the pages of trying to find a different job, because it was just boring. It was mundane. So find something about it. Dave's obviously got his contact lenses. Find a practice, find a niche area that you can really become highly skilled at and that can really engage you for a longer period. Because I think if you're just going to do 20-minute refractions for 40 years, it's pretty mind-numbing. But optometry, the scope of optometry is so wide. So get some experience, be brave, get out of your comfort zone. And independent optometry, especially in a rural setting, it really can give you such a rewarding career.
Yeah. And what's highlighted to me after this conversation is just the breadth of things that you've experienced with regards to, we haven't spoken about refraction at all. And if you're doing those 20-minute refractions for 40 years, you'd have nothing to talk about. But all your experiences and everything that you've been through is related to the other side of the business, which has been epic in its own right. So I feel like, hopefully this chat will motivate some of them that want a little bit more out of the profession too, because it really does have so much to offer. Final thoughts. So when you look back to date at everything you've achieved, what stands out to you most about your journey in optometry?
Oh, I'd have to say the challenges become your greatest friend. I think the big ones are the partnership stuff, COVID and Specsavers coming, the real fears of uncertainty and will my business survive? Am I good enough? Am I a good enough optometrist that people will still want to see me? And I reflect on that down. That's really what made me. It really is what strengthened me as a business person, as an optometrist, about how I want to do my job. and about what extra I can offer people. And also it strengthened our business to really understand what we stand for, our identity, and also the partnership. You know, the highs and lows really have strengthened Kristen and my resolve and partnership. So I guess when you're going through a tumultuous time, it's hard to think that it's actually going to be a positive and it's actually going to build you up. But I'm really grateful for those times, and I know I can get through them. I know now, like I've had experience, and it really empowers you to, when the next challenge comes up, that you'll get through it. And so I think that's probably the thing. Yeah, I'm really grateful. The practice we have now, I'm super proud of. I never really dreamed that we would have a business like that, to be honest. It's not something I sat down 25 years ago and said, this is what I want to do. But I'm extremely proud of it, and I think it's a unique business. I think, unfortunately, as you said, it's another conversation, but I think businesses like ours will become less and less. So I'm determined to fly the flag for independent optometry and also women, and that we can do it, and you can be successful.
Love it. Your message has been so inspiring, and I've loved our chat and the things that we've touched on. I think there's so many nuggets there of gold for people to look back on and to think about. And you've mentioned the word empower, and I have too, but I think it's really empowering and inspiring. So I know that when we first started speaking about it, you were like, I don't think we can talk for that long. And to be fair, I've got about 7 or 8 other questions that I've had to just be like, no, because this might go for 2 or 3 hours. So we were definitely wrong on that. But I thank you so much for your time and for your honest conversation and opening up to us about the challenges that you've faced and how you've overcome them. And really inspiring, and really appreciate your time, Kelly. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. It's been really good.
And Kelly, finally, if anyone wants to reach out to you about any of the things that we've discussed today, or anything that they want to maybe chat to you about, what's the best way that people can reach you?
So probably on the practice email, which is found on our website. So if you've got a Bridge Eye Care website, there's an email address on there. I'd be more than happy to have a phone conversation or meet up at a conference, or, however people would like to communicate. But if I can make some small difference or give some advice or help someone find their path in optometry, I'd be, really, really honoured to be able to have those conversations. So reach out, definitely.
Cool. And we'll provide those details in the show notes as well. So if anyone's interested, just jump on the show notes and they can find out those details and get in touch with Kelly. Thank you for joining us on The Focused View, proudly presented by Optical. It's been our privilege to share the insights and stories that resonate deeply with the eye care community. We hope today's episode has not only inspired you, but also armed you with the practical strategies and innovative ideas to help you enhance your practice and professional journey. If you found value in our conversation, we'd be grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform, and share this episode with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals like you and grow our community of visionaries. Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website www.thefocusedview.com.au for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.